Hey guys, welcome. Day 14 we're looking at, and today we're looking at lessons 45 and 46. Okay, so lessons 45, we're dividing a decimal number by a whole number. So we talked about in the previous video how we can manipulate division problems to make them a little bit easier, to perform the calculation. We also talked about multiplying decimal numbers, how we just multiply and then account for the decimal number. Division is going to be a little bit different. So if we're dividing, okay, and we have a decimal number, okay, what we do, for example, 4.2 divided by 3, here we have our division. And again, if we're using calculator, which you guys are able to at this point, you can just punch it in, but it's good to know how to do it by hand. If you don't have a calculator or a lot of tests you'll have down the road, you can use calculator and some you can't. So it's a good idea to know how to do this. So 3 goes into 4 once. Well, 1 times 3 is 3. 4 minus 3 is 1. And then the decimal is here, so I just bring it up here into my solution. And then I drop down my 2, and then 3 goes into now 12. Okay, it goes in 4 times. 4 times 3 is 12. I have nothing left over, so 1.4. If I did have something left over, I would continue going until I either had a repeating decimal, which we've talked about briefly, or a terminating decimal. Or if we're working with fractions, we can write them as mixed numbers. We're not doing just remainders anymore. So we don't put, it goes into it 5, remainder 4. Okay, we're going to actually put it as a mixed number, a decimal number, and we'll talk more about that when some come up. Okay, so we get 1.4. We go through it right there. Okay, example 3, we have 0.6 divided by 5. Now, if this is a decimal number out here, we'll talk about, you shouldn't see any on today's homework, but there's a way, if this is a decimal, that makes it a little bit trickier, so we can move the decimal of both the dividend and the divisor in order to keep it equivalent, but make it easier to work with. But again, we're probably not going to see that today, so we're not going to waste time with it. So how many times does 5 go into 0? Well, it goes in 0 times, and then I have my decimal. 0 times 5 is 0, so now I'm at the 6. 5 goes into 6 once. 1 times 5 is 5. 6 minus 5 is 1. So I don't put remainder 1, I keep going. So even though there's not a 0 here, we know from one of our previous lessons, we can keep adding zeros into infinity. So I drop down a 0. Well, 5 goes into 10 twice. 2 times 5 is 10, so that's where it terminates. So that would be my solution. Okay, practice set, we'll go over those as a class. So if you want to do a few of them as practice, look it over, feel free. Okay, lesson 46, writing decimal numbers in expanded notation, mentally multiplying decimal numbers by 10 and by 100. So anything that's base 10, or 1 and a bunch of zeros after it, 10, 100,000, 10,000, a million, billion, whatever. It's really easy because when we're multiplying or dividing, we're really just moving that decimal place. And we'll introduce that today. So again, we know our ones place, going to the left, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000s, and so on. We have the same, we have place values to the right, tenths, a hundredths, thousands, and then it's going to follow the same pattern like to the left of the decimal. The only thing is we don't have a ones or oneths place. Okay, it starts with tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10,000, 100,000, and again, it's that TH at the end that tells us it's less than 1. Okay, so to get $1,000 is less than a penny. To get $1,000 is obviously something to get excited about. All right, so if we have this number, well, 4 times 1 is 4. 0 in the tenths place, so we don't need to put anything for that. And then 2 times 1 over 100, because it's the hundredths place. And then 5 times 1 over 1,000, because the 5 is in the thousandths place. Again, just a way to rewrite it. And again, we don't use this a ton down the road. This is just to help us kind of identify place value and understand what value those places hold. So again, we could multiply this out and perform the calculation, and we would end up back where we started. So we do the parentheses, whatever place value it is, ones or tens, hundreds, thousands, whatever, or when we get to the right of the decimal, hundredths, thousandths, or whatever it is. So example 1, if I have 5.06, and 5 and 6 hundredths, I'm going to do 5 times 1, so that's 5, plus, okay, I don't do anything for the tenths place because it's just 0, and we don't want to make more work for ourselves, so then it's 6 times 1 over 100, 1/100th. Okay. And then if we added that together, then we'd get back to 5.06. If we want to write this as a decimal, well, 4 times 1/10 is going to be 4 tenths. 5 times 1/1000th is going to be 5 thousandths. So that would be 4 times 1/10. So that's 4 tenths. Nothing was in the hundredths place. So I put 0. 0 times 1/100th is 0. So we don't have it written out, but we know we include the 0. And then 5 times 1/1000th. So we added all that together. We multiplied and added. We would get 405 thousandths. Okay, and then mentally multiplying by 10 and 100, and this will apply for 1,000, 10,000, and so on. If it's a 1 with zeros after it, it's kind of nice because we can just follow this rule. So 24 times 10, well, I know 24 times 1 is 24. So 10, there's 1 0, so I add 1 0 at the end. 100 has two zeros, so 2400, because I have 2 zeros at the end. And even if we said times a million, well, a million would have 6 zeros. It'd be 24 million because it would have 6 zeros after it. And if we're multiplying numbers by tens, the digits shift one place to the left. Then we multiply by a decimal number by 100, the digit shifts 2 places to the left. Okay, so even though there's not a decimal here, we can think of 24, and it's 10 times 10, so I'm moving the decimal 1 place to the right. Times 100, I'm moving it 2 places to the right. So even though we don't see a decimal, that is the same thing we're doing. So if I have 0.24 times 10, I move it 1 place to the right. Okay? 0.24 times 100, well, there's 2 zeros, so I move it 2 places to the right. This will be really nice when we're working with decimals to percents and percents to decimal. It makes it really easy because we're just moving the decimal 2 places to the right or 2 places to the left. So it's a lot easier than working with fractions down the road. So if I have 3.75 times 10, well, there's 1 0, which means I'm going to move the decimal place 1 to the right. So then it's going to become 37.5. Okay, same number times 100. Well, 2 zeros, so I move it 2 places to the right. So I get 375. And then if we had a fraction with decimals in it to make it easier to, this is similar to the concept we talked about in the previous video, I can manipulate or rename both of these by multiplying by 10 over 10, which is equal to 1. So we're renaming it. We're not changing the value. So then move the decimal 1 place to the right. 1 place to the right. Now I have 12 divided by 4, which is much easier, especially if we're doing it by hand. To calculate, 12 divided by 4 is 3. Okay, but I can't just move 1 decimal in the numerator and leave the denominator the same. That would change the outcome. So, all right, then practice set we will do together. So make sure you have this completed, and we'll see you guys in class.